Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 2 of the Pursuit of Precision podcast. Today, we were fortunate to interview Tom Wilson, the ex-CEO of Olympia Entertainment, Detroit's premier marketer for both sports and entertainment events. Guys, this was an unbelievable experience. I felt so fortunate to even be able to sit down next to this man, let alone hear all the stories he had in his long career in Detroit. So please take the time to watch this one. It's incredible. Let's head to the episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pursuit of Precision podcast. My name is Ryan Jaros, and over the next 12 months, I'm going to be interviewing 50 of the most successful, intelligent, influential, and overall happy people that I can in order to hear their story and share with all of you what I learn along the way. So today, we have our guest, Tom Wilson. So if you don't mind, Tom, I'm going to read off some of your accomplishments here and brag on you a little bit if you don't mind.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, you're very, very well known here in Detroit, but there's going to be a number of people that are not from the area that don't necessarily know your background or what you've done. And so I'd like to share some of that stuff and kind of give them a synopsis of what you've done.
Sure. I'd like to know myself.
Oh, yeah.
At this age, you
can correct some of this stuff too, because you know how that goes. Sometimes the internet can be a little false when it comes to some of this stuff. So first off, Tom is a husband to Linda, father of 2 daughters, 1 son, and now 7 grandchildren. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's correct. He was the sales director in 1978 for the Pistons, the Detroit Pistons basketball team. He was the administrative director in 1979 and then became CEO in 1983. Right, so I'm going to recap that. That's only 5 years' time, so amazing stuff. During this time, it's been noted that these were one of the best marketed teams in the entire NBA and also one of the highest valued teams at that time. In 1987, he became the president and CEO of Palace Sports Entertainment. In this position, he oversaw the company's 3 venues, the Palace, which is where the Detroit Pistons would play, DTE Energy Music Theater, which was a theater, obviously, that hosted musical events, and Meadowbrook Music Festival as well, same thing. He was named the president and CEO of Olympia Entertainment in 2010. They own and or managed the Detroit Red Wings, the Tigers, the Detroit Tigers, a baseball team, the Fox Theater, the Detroit Masonic Temple, Comerica Park, and most recently, Little Caesars Arena, which hosts both the Red Wings and the Pistons at the same facility. That's amazing. I'm still astonished. I don't know how they're able to do that so effectively and efficiently. So I'd love to hear how they're able to do that. But lastly, he participates in the community in so many different ways. Here's just a couple, but he's the president of the Pistons Palace Foundation, director of Parks Program, honorary chair for the Salvation Army and Forgotten Harvest, and so many other different things. So I could be here for the next 25, 30 minutes just listing off all the stuff that you've done in your career, but I just wanted to hit on some of a few notes to just explain some of the stuff that you've done. So we're so grateful to have you here, and I can't thank you enough for making the time to be here.
Happy to do it.
So all that being said, as in the description of this podcast and everything that we do, the accolades and all the stuff that you see when you Google yourself or a number of other people that we've interviewed is you're going to see the things that you've accomplished, right? And so the goal with what we're trying to do in these interviews is to find out how you were able to do it. I think you could look up 50 different articles explaining the things that you've done, and maybe not as much of deep dive into what you were able to do to make it happen over the career that you had. Mm-hmm. So starting from the beginning, if you were to paint us a picture of what day one looked like for you, and I'm talking back before you had any success, before you had really accomplished anything, what was day one for you? Maybe out of high school, maybe after college. What was day one for you in regards to ground zero?
Well, I had an odd way of getting into professional sports, which really is where I spent most of my career. And I grew up here in Detroit, 6 Mile and Woodward. My dad left when I was a year old, so I never had a father. I was an only child, and I worked pretty much full-time from the time I was 15 years old to help out my mom. She was a single mom, and it was always a struggle. And so you do learn a work ethic. You miss all your high school days, and you miss a lot of your college days because of that. On the other hand, you probably learn some kind of work ethic or dedication that perhaps you don't pick up if you're just kind of going through the motions of the regular high school years. So I went to Cass Tech downtown back when it was, I think, probably the number 3 high school in the country. It was invitation only, and so that was nice. But then I went to Wayne because I had to stay. I went to Wayne State because I had to stay home. I couldn't go to Michigan or something like a lot of my friends did from Cass. And then I went to night school for a while so I could, again, help out at home and everything like that. Now, the odd twist is that the day after I graduated from college, I moved to California to be an actor, of all things. And so I spent a couple years. I was pretty lucky. I was able to make a living out there. And then I was shooting a show called Barnaby Jones, which was before you were born.
I've heard of it. I'll tell you that.
Okay, you heard of it? All right. So I used to get a lot of athlete parts because I'm 6'4", and I had a little bit of coordination. And so I was playing a guy that was throwing basketball games for the mob. And we filmed it down at the Forum where the Lakers played. And we had some Laker players. We had the front office. I became friends with them over the course of the week. During stoppages of shooting, we'd go out and play basketball and everything like that. So one time after I'd gone to a few games, they said, we got an opening in our marketing department. Would you be interested in doing it?
And what was your role when you first went into when you were a part of that? What was your role there?
It was an entry level sales position. So
in terms of the acting,
I was just a guy that was, again, throwing games for the mob. I was.
Oh, okay, got it.
So I was, and our whole team was actually doing that. So it was a very small part.
Got it.
But it provided me an opportunity. I had always wanted to be an actor, but this is the Lakers. I mean, at the time they were sort of the Cadillac of the industry.
Yeah.
And so I was able to get the job, and I worked there for a couple of years, worked myself up to sales manager. And then we had our first daughter and decided let's move back home. So a little gap in there where I actually bought a piece of property out in Malibu, and I put up a spec home. So it was a big left turn from what had been a big left turn. So I guess that just shows you can do a lot of things here. I didn't know anything about building a house or anything like that. Almost lost every nickel that I had. Didn't know where I was going to turn because my family had no money. My wife's family had no money. There was nowhere to go. And this was an interesting life lesson. Went back to the bank. I said, I just need $20,000. The house is sold. I'm like right there. I need $20,000 to fix it and finish it. Sorry, they wouldn't give it to me. So I was out at dinner with some friends singing my tale of woe. And one of my friends said, well, what bank is it? And I told him. He said, we do all kinds of work with them. Let me make a call. He makes one phone call, and they say, yeah, sure, you can have the money. Early lesson that relationships, the power of relationships that you don't have when at that time I was 25 years old.
Yeah.
You don't have relationships at 25 other than your close friends. But a very early lesson that meet people, get to know people, and you can trust them at some point along the way that they will help you out. And this saved us. So we were able to finish the house, cash out, and that gave us the money to come back home, which home is here. And so came back here with a goal to get involved in sports broadcasting. I thought that would be a neat thing. I'd been an actor. This would be an easy thing. Couldn't get a job in that, so I called the Pistons, and they happened to have an opportunity because they were moving from Cobo Hall downtown with a staff of 6. That's all they had. They were going to go out to the Silverdome, 80,000 seat arena, so they needed to staff up. So I got a sales job there. 6 weeks later, the guy who hired me went back to Phoenix, so they promoted me to sales director. A year later, Bill Davidson, who was our principal owner, decided to change at the top, and so he put me in charge of the organization. I was 28 years old. I wasn't nearly ready for the job, which I told him later, like years later after we had some success.
Yeah.
And so what we had was a lot of young guys. I was 28. A lot of our staff was 22, 23, 24, just out of college. And we were awful. I mean, we had the worst team. So it really didn't matter what we did. None of us knew what we were doing, but we just said, look, we're in an 80,000 seat stadium. We don't have any fans. We're averaging 1,500, 3,000 people a game. We got to get people here.
Yeah.
So we just said, let's break all the rules. Let's do, they tell you can't do this, you can't do that. Who cares?
You felt no pressure to really...
No pressure.
You could have the freedom that pretty much you needed because of the fact that you didn't have the background of knowing the correct script on this is the right way to do it or not. Right?
That's exactly right.
So you had the freedom to be able to do that.
Yeah, and we had an owner, and this is really key. We had an owner that understood the situation because a lot of times, particularly in sports, very competitive, and all your owners are extraordinarily successful in their own lives. And they didn't become
competitive, I would assume, in their own right.
Yes. Absolutely. And none of them were successful by sitting back. They were all successful. They're hard-charging guys.
Yeah.
But fortunately, Bill Davison was one of those people who understood reality, and he wasn't going to say, well, why don't we have 20,000 people in here? Well, we suck. And so he said, you're learning. And so 2 years later, when a guy named Isaiah Thomas was drafted by us, now we had something that we could sell. And by that time, all the young people of 23 and 24 and 25 were now 25, 26, 27.
And these are the people that you worked with.
Yes, they all stayed.
Got it.
The key people all stayed. And now we knew what we were doing. And so the things that we did to take a chance, now that we had a team worth watching, now people actually did come out. We might work and get an extra couple hundred people. Well, now it was a few thousand. Now the building started to fill up, and now we knew what we were doing. And now we became very quickly a laughingstock to a model franchise. And that's a long way of answering that question.
No, that's no problem. I mean, there's a lot that I want to hit on from
Sure.
what you just kind of rattled through, right? And this is kind of what I was getting at in regards to, I'm sure there were so many things, intricacies to how you were able to make that happen. And I guess my biggest question from all of that is maybe what was your first big win that gave you some confidence to maybe stack to the next level? Because at the end of the day, you just listed off a number of things that you did. They were very bold things that maybe not everybody would do, right? Well, was there something that maybe motivated you at the time, or was it you had your first win and then understood maybe I can continue to replicate the success regardless of what the subject matter is? Because you did a number of different things. It wasn't like you just stayed in the same line. You went from building a house, like you said you were trying to do, and then scaling it into leaving all the way to go home and working with the Pistons, right? So there were a number of different things where you didn't really have any reason to believe that you could do it outside of maybe your confidence and your ability to figure it out. Yep. And so that's more so what I'm getting at is what do you think that your first win was that started to build that confidence for you to be able to say, okay, I can do this again?
Well, I think I go back to what I was saying earlier about how we just said there's no rules. I mean, I'll give you a good example of one of the things that worked really well. As I say, we're playing it's a different time in the NBA. People weren't selling a ton of tickets or anything like that. Nobody was selling a ton of tickets. They were selling more than 3,000. But we're playing in this big building. And so we said, okay, we can't keep playing to 9,000 people because it's echoing around here. It never feels like a crowd. What do we do to really hit a home run? So, we had the idea, let's on every Saturday do something spectacular. So, for example, we went to Marathon Gas. We said, Marathon, why don't you buy 20,000 tickets for $1 a piece? I mean, that's like giving them away. And then give away 4 with every fill up that somebody does. It's not a big deal. We don't make a whole lot of money, but we need to have butts in the seats. We need to have people come out and see us. We need to have people read the paper on Sunday morning and say, they had 18,000 people out at the Silverdome. What's going on out there? How do we, build a curiosity, build a, anticipation, build a hunger for NBA basketball? Because there'd never been any in this city. So we started doing things like that with Marathon. And then there was a guy named Bob Euchre who used to do this commercial for Miller Lite. I must be in the front row. He ends up in the back of the stadium and everything. It was a funny commercial. So we have a Bob Euchre night. We bring him in and we do 20,000 tickets. We have our guys call Milwaukee. Milwaukee calls us a bunch of young punks. So we have a punk night. We put Keller Chapuka, our player, in a leather jacket. And if you come out and you wear leather, you get in for $1. We have 30,000 people that come out. Grandmothers coming out in leather. together, it became a talking point. It became an interesting thing to read in the paper. It became national news that who are these guys? The Detroit Pistons, the laughingstock forever. Suddenly, they're leading the league in attendance by 5,000 people a game. And, it brought confidence to all of our staff. We started feeling like, hey, maybe we do know what we're doing. We have the league talking about best practices. Hey, look at what Detroit's doing. Somehow they've turned it all around. So it was wins like that. And then when you have an owner like Bill Davidson, who was, again, incredibly supportive, I think deep down inside, he loved the fact that he'd gone from a laughingstock franchise to
the
something
contrast.
Yes.
So that's interesting, though, because as you just made that point, typically it's all about how good are we, right? And it sounds like he was of the mindset of look at how far we've come, and he's more proud of that than anything else, which is probably not the most common thing that you'd see in the league.
No, not really. And I'll tell you, we'll get into like the Palace story later, but when we decided to build the arena, there were articles written. This is Davidson's folly. How stupid can you be? We already have an arena. We don't need a second arena or anything like that. And I remember when we built it, and this was at a time where arenas they were all failures. I mean, they were all built by cities and states and municipalities because you couldn't make enough money to keep the doors open. So you had to go back to the trough and keep getting money from whatever that municipal body was.
Okay.
So he builds the most expensive arena in history. And he just says, look, you guys design it, you run it. I don't know what any of this is. I'll pay for it, but just, figure out a way where you're not coming back to me for money. Well, then it becomes the most profitable arena in history. And David Stern, the commissioner, at one of our owners' meetings says to the owners, look, you got one job this year. You got to get to Detroit. You got to see this arena because we're not in the basketball business anymore. We're in the arena business. We're in the development business. We're in the entertainment business. We're in the concert business.
Yeah.
And we're in the basketball business. And it changed the way arenas were built forever. And he took such pride in that. It really wasn't the money. I mean, he was doing just fine with his regular business. But the fact that everybody said this was a folly. Everybody said this was such a stupid idea. And not only was it not stupid, it was revolutionary. And so I think for somebody like him, when you hang with people who are really, really wealthy, what is it? It's not another dollar that really makes it for them. It's a pride. It's an accomplishment. It's doing something nobody thought you could do. And that's a win, I think, in his book. And people always said, why didn't he sell the name to that arena? There's a lot of money just sitting there. I think he never sold the name because he took such pride in the fact that this was going to be such a failure and it was anything but.
Yeah. No, I mean, and my question too, in regards to all these, I mean, you just rattled off again a couple great, amazing ideas that you had in regards to marketing. Did you have an interest in that at a young age? Is it something that you felt came natural to you? Do you feel like you put a lot of time into learning how that works? Or I feel like those ideas aren't ideas that just come to everybody. And so my question is that something that you took an interest in early on, or those are just fantastic ideas? I'm curious to hear how that came about for you.
Well, sometimes it's just dumb luck. Many times it's finding whatever your passion is in life. And the idea of being in professional sports, I mean, that's you talk about folly. That's a folly. I mean, when I was growing up, you got into...
You're saying thinking you could be
in professional sports, because that doesn't happen to normal people. Who gets it is the nephew of the guy who works with the Tigers or something like that. And they'll go in. Sports didn't pay much money, so unless you had a top position, you'd go in, you'd do it for a couple of years, and then you got a real job. So sports wasn't like real. It wasn't like today where there's so much money at stake that they have to pay good people good money to keep them. But I read a book when I was probably in grade school. It was called VEC, as in rec. And there was a guy named Bill Veck. And he was an owner, but he was a maverick owner of the Chicago White Sox and a couple of other teams at different times. He was the one who put up the little person, the midget as they used to call him, but the little person at bat, so he would get a walk, right away because the pitcher couldn't pitch to him. Eddie Goodell was the guy's name, and so this whole book was about all the crazy promotions he had, all the crazy ideas, and you read this and you go, God, that would be the greatest job, but it's never going to happen to me. It's never going to happen to a real person. But I look back on that book as, gosh, what an opportunity if you have the right situation to do amazing things. And then a lot of the other things that we did that we did well, came from a couple of things. I remember when we were going to build the arena, how do you make this thing make money? Well, the roof had caved in at the Silverdome one year, and so we had to play down at Joe Louis Arena. And so I was walking around the arena with my right-hand guy, and I said, why are the suites always at the top of the arena? Why don't they put them right here in the concourse, 20 rows up? You're getting the most money from these people. Why don't you let them see the event? So he didn't think anything about it because we had no idea we were ever going to build an arena. But the idea of putting up 20, 25 rows, that was an idea that came right out of there. So when we finally decided to build the arena, we just said, well, what about that idea? And then can we go one further and put them like 16 rows up? And then we can charge more money than anybody's ever charged before. And we had an architect that had never designed an arena before. If we had an architect that had designed an arena, he would have told you that won't work. That's not going to work. You're going to ruin your sight lines. Well, this guy said it's going to ruin your sight lines too. And I drew on a napkin. It's one of those stories. I drew on a napkin. What if we put the suites underneath the seats and just the little area outside, the patio where you watch the event from, is visible? Can't you do that? I don't think so, but let us go back and take a look. Well, they go back, they put a pencil to it, and they come back in the next week and say, you know what, this can work. So suddenly you've got 50 suites where they've never been before. You got another 50, 25 rows up, so another 8 rows or so behind the first one. And now you're charging more money in Detroit, Michigan than anybody in LA or New York has ever charged before. And it's crazy that you can get away with that. But it was necessity because we had to make the thing work financially. And it's just ideas that we had, 5-6 years before that finally we had a chance to put into fruition. And then you look at that idea, you go, well, isn't that kind of common sense? Doesn't that? I mean, how did the whole world miss on this thing?
Well, it sounds like no one was willing to do things out of the norm or willing to do things different than everybody else was just copying the next guy.
That's exactly right.
And instead of that, it seems like you had a number of people on your team that didn't have the background of doing everything how everybody else did. It sounds like, as you said, the owner, in addition to the architect, in addition to yourself, in addition to your team, all were willing to do things completely new and different because maybe they didn't have the experience to do it like everybody else did anyways.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And there's a lot to be said for, just a clean sheet of paper and coming up with a series of ideas or going home for a weekend and, okay, bring me your 20 best ideas. And then once we got the building going, I'm a big Disney guy. So you wonder, where do ideas come from? And we used to take the kids down to Disney a couple times a year because, that's one place you can take them that always works. You take them to Grand Canyon and it's like, oh boy. So we would go down there and I'd come back with a sheet of paper or 2 sheets of paper with, a dozen ideas. Every time I go down, the operations people hated it when I went to
undercover
Disney.
Operation.
Undercover.
Your wife's like, yeah, it's a family event. And you're sitting there taking notes in the corner.
Exactly right. Exactly right. But nobody treated people better. I mean, Disney, it was in their heyday back then in the 80s and 90s. And so we'd come back with all those ideas, but that's how we trained our staff because it wasn't just enough that we have a great arena for you and everything like that. We have to treat you well. And it's a simple thing. They're not customers, they're guests. It changes the mindset of the ushers and the security people and everything like that if you can view them as people coming into your home. And so our level of service, if you will, and the gratitude that we had to the people who were coming down to see our events was sort of unprecedented. Again, common sense, but common sense is pretty uncommon, most of the time.
100%. Well, I wonder too, I mean, you brought up a point of reading a book when you were in grade school, you said. How much do you feel like that was actually in your brain when you were starting to progress through your career? Because you said it was so frantic, turn this way. But when you tell me that story, it sounds like maybe that was something that you envisioned for yourself, even though you didn't maybe know that it was possible. Is that true?
I really don't know. I mean, I remember reflecting back on it when I got into sports and going like, well, this is kind of odd, that it's come
that you
full
were
circle.
Thinking about that. Yeah.
Yeah. But it was so unrealistic that something like that could happen. My whole life has been kind of unrealistic, that could be.
You feel like each level has been a surprise for you almost.
Everything has been a surprise, and everything has been good fortune, and the good fortune to meet somebody like Bill Davidson, who had confidence in me, and as it wasn't like I was bursting with confidence when I was doing this. I was afraid, we were so bad. I was afraid I was going to get fired almost a daily basis. And my wife to this day still gives me grief when I talk about, oh, those were great years. I said, well, that's because you weren't living with you. You come home every day thinking, oh my gosh, this is the last day because something else went wrong. And then slowly but surely, success after success after success, you start getting confidence and you realize, I can do this. I'm not just doing it. I can do it.
Yeah. I mean, and a question for you as well. I see in situations like that, there is pressure you're stating, right? And so to me, the way that you were able to make it happen and continue to make it happen, even though you had this pressure, tells me that one, it's just energy, and you can either cave under that pressure or use it to be like, I got to get up out of bed and I got to make things happen, right? Yep. Would you say that was something that you intentionally used as fuel, is knowing my family depends on me, my boss depends on me, all these people around me depend on me? Did you say, would that be something that you focused on or paid attention to a lot when you were going to work?
I think that's a big part of it. I think the other part of it is, who do you surround yourself with? And as I mentioned, everybody we had was young. Our people stayed with us because we created a culture where it was our company. It wasn't my company. It wasn't Bill Davidson's company. I mean, it was Bill Davidson's company, but
even he would speak in that way. Is that
he just gave us so much latitude. I mean, I talked to him like literally every day for 30 years. And sometimes it's a long conversation, sometimes it's a short conversation. He didn't want to be a mentor, but you couldn't help but learn. So there were things that he would say on Tuesday, and you kind of listen, and then on Friday something would happen. You go, that's what he meant. That's what he meant. So I was learning from him constantly. But the most important thing was the quality of people that we had, and our ability to create this culture where they felt like they owned it. And it really manifested itself when we went from the Silverdome to the Palace. The thing we kept talking about to all of our people was, this is your building. This is your building. So everybody in the Silverdome moved out there with the understanding that the operations guy feels like, well, this is my building, and I'm taking care of my building, my structure, my physical structure. The salesperson feels like, this is my building I'm selling suites to, and this is my building I'm selling sponsorships to. And the HR people, we just said, bring in good human beings, that more than smart people, bring in good human beings, because this is going to be a high pressure sort of situation. You're dealing with the public. That's always difficult. Under pressure, people are going to revert back to who they really are. So if you're really a bad guy pretending to be a good guy, you're going to be a bad guy as soon as the pressure turns up. So let's surround ourselves with good human beings. And then they police themselves. And so it really becomes an interesting thing. I always said as a CEO, you're as effective as the number of departments you don't have to worry about. I wanted a salesperson who was going to I worry about sales every day. I want somebody who's going to worry about them more. I want them to worry about it day and night and be as obsessed about it as I am, and they don't have to worry about it. I'm still concerned, but I know he or she is even more concerned than I am, and they're driven just in their area, where I'm driven in every area.
Yeah.
They're driven just in their area. And so I don't have to worry about that. I don't have to worry about this. I don't have to worry about our booking people, because they hate to lose a show and they're going to get them. So the combination of all the people that we had pulling in the same direction really made for the success. And it's very interesting. I still run into people. I run into ushers, former security people, and they will tell you today, the Palace years were the best years of my life. And so if we did anything right, it was creating a culture where everybody sort of thrived and everybody felt like they were part of something.
Yeah.
And that's important. So, I get a little bit of credit for some of the things that happened, but the biggest thing was, and it's like that in sports teams, as you know, as an athlete, culture. And if you don't have a winning culture, you're not going to be winning.
Yeah, no, it reminds me. One of my favorite quotes is by Brennan Burchard. I don't know if you've never heard of that. Have you ever heard of that author?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
he says people support what they create, right? And so if everybody feels like they're creating what's happening, regardless if they are an usher or if they're in the back office like you guys, I think that is what creates that winning environment. So that's amazing. But in regards to all of this, the marketing that you guys did for that was just unbelievable. And I wonder, for you personally, as someone that started off in sales, right? There's a lot of personal responsibility that you started off with. You're selling, your responsibility to sell. At what point did you transition from being an individual that's selling to a leader that is now helping others sell? Or was that always the case, being that you were part of an organization? Were you ever in a role where you were just focused, like your position was only selling on your own? Or were you always put into a position where you're leading other salespeople or marketing professionals?
Once I was in a position of leadership, even in the early days, one thing I always believed in is that every job is a sales job. Every job's a sales job. So I had a lot of people, maybe they were in human resources or something like that. Well, I'm not in a sales job. Oh yeah. I mean, part of your job is from the first day that somebody interviews, is to sell them on, here's what you're going to be doing. And maybe you're in PR. Well, PR is not a sales job. No, PR is like the biggest sales job, and you have to look at it that way. If you don't, you're missing the boat. If you think PR is putting out that Isaiah Thomas has averaged 17 points the last 6 games, that's a sports information director. That's a job that it's like
analytics almost.
It's like analytics.
You're reporting data,
right? What your job is to pick something up. Here's why you should write an article about Isaiah Thomas. Here's why we want him to be in Sports Illustrated. Here's why we want to do this. Here's what you want to talk to the newspaper reporters about. Here's how you get Isaiah interviewed in the newspaper, so that people start seeing him in a little different way.
Yeah, it's creating narratives in the same way that you talked about the punk situation where everybody was wearing the leather jackets. You're creating a narrative based off of something that was going on.
Exactly. And you're an usher. Well, that's not a sales job. Well, how you treat people, the impact you have on people as they come through the door, that's part of sales. I mean, we're all in here together. If we're going to average 20,000 people, if we're going to sell this place out every single night, every single year, it's going to depend on the fun that they have. And so, a lot of folks I found in our business, they settle when the team is good, because they always tell you the easiest way to sell tickets is to win. Well, that's 1,000% right. But how you treat people is going to dictate how well you do when you don't win, because you're just buying time. We'll win and then we're not very good. Well, give me another year, get these people back, because it's fun coming to the Palace. It's fun having a night out, even if we don't win, because in 2 years, we can keep them for 2 years just by being good to them and nice to them and giving them good experiences. We got a chance to build the team back and we can start winning again. It'll be fun again. But everybody is part of that, and everybody sort of understood it.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's the biggest challenge is how you're able to win and when you're not winning, right?
Yes, exactly.
How many overall, when you look at the span of how long you were there, how many seats were you, or how many butts in seats were you able to put, regardless of if the team was fantastic or horrible?
Yeah,
that's probably the biggest win. And it sounds like, as I said, your leadership. It was Bill, correct? Is his name?
Bill Davidson. Yes.
Bill? Mm-hmm. He was on board with that 100% as well. It wasn't always about the result, because I think he'd understood the grand outcome of, we're going to be good sometimes and we're going to be bad other times. And so are we delivering at a high level regardless of how good the team's doing?
Right. And interestingly enough, he was a guy that didn't believe in marketing. When I first got in there,
I think you got him to believe.
He became a believer, and it was those phone calls that we had every day. And I'd say, well, here's what we're going to do. And I'm sure there were times on the other end of the phone, he's going like, well, that's another dumb idea. And then, you come to the game and you look around, there's 22,000 people there. You're going like, well, maybe it wasn't as dumb as I thought it was. And slowly he transitioned. He'd never say anything about it, but he became very appreciative, I guess, if you want to say, pick a word, of what we were doing. And he understood what we were doing, and he would start talking about that. And, he was a guy that it was interesting because he never did interviews, didn't want to do interviews, didn't need the fame, didn't need the attention or anything like that.
Thank you for doing this one.
Yeah, right. So it put me in an interesting position of I became the face of the organization. Now everybody knew who he was, but we were on the same page, so I could do an interview, and I know I would never embarrass him, and I would always credit him for the success that we had, because he was the great enabler. His keeping distance and him allowing us to do whatever, giving us the opportunity for all of our people. And I always went back to him, and I always credited our folks. I mean, I was never one to say, "Wait, look what I did," because I didn't do much. I just surrounded myself with great folks who did everything and had the success. And he became very much that same person. I'll tell you, if you have time, I'll tell you an interesting story about.
I've got all the time in the world.
When I first started working for him, he was probably mid-50s or so, and very successful. Had a company worth millions and stuff. And he was telling me this later, because I never saw this side of him. He said, I was the worst person to work for. He said, I was profane. I would scream at you. I mean, I would take your hide off. I was smarter than everybody, and I knew it, and I just made everybody's life miserable. On the other hand, we were a very successful company. And he said, then I sat down with myself and I said, you know what? We can be good, but we can't be great. We'll never be great as long as I'm doing this, as long as I'm making every decision. If we want to be good, and by good I mean big and national and international and everything like that, I have to change myself completely. I have to become a leader. I have to get people to understand and buy into my philosophies and everything like that, and then take those philosophies, take them to Los Angeles, take them to New York, take them to Paris, take them to China, take them to wherever they ended up going. And he did literally the level of self-analysis. You just, at least in my career, I've not found that in successful people, because successful people, something must be right, and for somebody to step back and say, yeah, I've been successful, but I can be more successful. And if I want to be great, and I want my company to be great, I got to change myself. And it was the biggest eye-opening thing. And he became, instead of being this, this totalitarian sort of leader, he became a completely different human being. And the people in his organization who used to fear him worshipped him. I remember my daughter did an internship in Tudela, Spain. And we went over there while she was over there in the middle of summer. So we went over there and we met with some of the people at that place. And Bill Davidson walked on water over there. They had never met him, but the reputation, the image, the aura that he had developed, which was completely different than it would have been 20 years earlier, was amazing in a country that's thousands and thousands of miles away. And that's how it was all over the world. So the metamorphosis of this guy and the willingness to ask the questions of himself.
Yeah, the humility to be able to be as successful as he was. I don't know exactly his background, but to be that successful and still be able to self-reflect and say, I did good, but I can be a lot better.
That's right.
And I think those are the people that ultimately have the most impact in this world. And so that's amazing to hear. I had a question about when you made that transition, because you're talking a lot about Bill's leadership, and I'm curious about yours. Now, you at a young age were responsible for, I don't know if you saw it this way at the time, but you had a big responsibility. You said at 28 years old, you were responsible for the marketing for a large organization like that. What were probably the biggest, most impactful things that you learned in those first maybe 2-3 years where you said you didn't know what you were doing?
I think a lot was trust, because the first thing you start with is, I got to do this.
You got to handle it.
I got to handle this. I got to take this all on.
Yep.
And so you start and you realize I'm kind of doing this by myself. I mean, we got to sell, so I'm going to go sit with the sales guys and we're going to go sell. Well, I don't have any time. I got to, what about this thing? And what about this thing? What about this thing? And so you realize early on that we're going to be as good as everybody else is. So how do I spend time with Madeline, and how do I spend time with John, and how do I spend time with Dan, and how do I get them to believe in themselves? So I mean, particularly when you're awful, which we were, how do I convince this person that you can sell season tickets and you can sell sponsorships and we can do this and that when I don't even believe it myself? Okay, well, let's cobble together some sort of let's find our truth, is what I used to say to the guys all the time, that, okay, we can't do this, we can't do this, we can't do this. What are the 5 reasons why somebody should get a sponsorship with us? And what are the 5 reasons why somebody should get tickets? And maybe they don't hold up under the light of day, but we have to have a story to tell. We've got to be able to go out and do things. And I can't do this, and this, and this. You have to. You have to go out there and do it. So a lot of it was talking about everything is sales. A lot of that, when you're in the position of CEO or president of a corporation, is convincing people of how good they are, or how good they can be, when they don't believe it themselves. And they know I don't even have a product. You're asking me to go out there and be a great salesperson. I don't even have a product to sell. Okay, let's figure out between us, what is the product you have to sell? Yeah, maybe we don't have a great team, but you know who's coming in? Magic Johnson's coming in, Larry Bird's coming in, Dr. J is coming in. These are people from a different generation, but don't you want to see them? I mean, whether we beat them or not, I mean, you're seeing some of the greatest athletes in the history of this sport or any sport, and you're going to have the best seats in the house for it, and you're going to be able to take your best clients, and it's all about your business. This is really about your business. And in 2 years, those seats are going to be worth a lot of money, because in 2 years, we're going to have a team. So what's the story? And that was the other thing we used to say. We have to concoct. And concoct is a tough word, because that sounds like you're making it up. Yeah. But we have to come up with a scenario, a story, I don't want to say a line. I don't want to say anything that's, not true, but you got to put, a good front out. You got to, and there is a truth here. Let's find the truth that'll work for the person on the other end of the phone.